Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen Leathers. Good morning, Helen. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I am. How am I feeling this morning? Let me think. No, I'm very well.
Are we just tuning in?
Yeah, no, I just thought, well, I'll give it some thought. I normally just respond with a wonderfully well. I was actually thinking about it, but I am wonderfully well. Sorry, everyone. I'll do that thing again. I'm wonderfully well.
Good.
Life is good.
Excellent. What are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to talk about a challenge in coaching.
And what's that?
It is the grey space. Is it a line or is it a grey space? I think it's probably more of a grey space. The grey space between coaching and therapy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And challenging.
And challenging. And I don't think, for those of you out there hoping I'm going to provide a definitive answer, I'm not.
No.
Because it is a grey space. And I think it's one of the questions that comes up for our doctors on our coaching course a lot.
Yes.
So what we always say to doctors is you are probably some of the best equipped people to deal with emotional and psychological challenge for people in the coaching room. Mm-hmm. And you probably worry about it far more than anyone else would worry about it.
Yes.
So that's kind of, just have that in mind as you're listening, that you probably have the resources to deal with a lot of stuff that comes up in coaching that you think, oh, sounds a bit like therapy. It's not therapy, but can feel a bit like that at times. But you are over worrying about it, really.
So we'll say, don't worry, but we know they will.
We know they will.
Yeah.
But, and as in, what's it, sunscreen?
Yes.
She talks about, it's about as useful as chewing gum, the worry.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to explore it and see where we land with it and see how other people respond to it.
Okay. Where are we going to start?
We're going to start with looking at the differences between coaching and therapy. And I thought, rather than coming at it from a coaching perspective, I'd look at it from a therapy perspective. Because I think it's something that therapists can get a bit twitchy about what we're doing in the coaching room and whether that impacts on what they do. Although a lot of therapists have now found their way to coaching and have that dual role of being therapists and coaches. Yeah. So I thought I'd take a look at the British Association for Counsellors and Psychotherapists, BACP. So that's kind of their professional body, and see what they thought. So I had I look at the definitions that they provide on their website of therapy and of coaching. So their definition of therapy is that it provides a safe and confidential space for you to talk to a trained professional about your issues and concerns. Your therapist will help you explore your thoughts, feelings and behaviours so you can develop a better understanding of yourself and of others.
Oh, that sounds like coaching.
Sounds like coaching.
It does, doesn't it?
And I think this is where the difficulty comes in, isn't it? That is coaching, isn't it?
Yeah.
We obviously on our program, we take a psychological approach to coaching. So it's not a managerial approach. So you could say, well, in managerial coaching, you might not be doing this. You might just be going, okay, what's your goal? What options you got? How are you going to get there? You might never talk to someone about emotions. And I think a lot of managers don't want to talk about emotions. But I think if we're taking a more psychological approach to coaching, then we're necessarily going to talk about emotions and difficult feelings, difficult thoughts, difficult behaviors. They're going to come up. So I think when this topic comes up in conversations with coaches about the differences between coaching and therapy, quite often it's seen that therapy is a conversation about the past, whereas coaching is a conversation about the future. But that definition that I just read out doesn't mention the past or the future.
No.
It's just a conversation about thoughts and feelings and behaviours, and just addressing issues and concerns. So I think that's interesting. But what's really interesting, on the same BACP website, they have an A to Z of therapeutic approaches.
Okay.
And it turns out that C is for coaching, according to the BACP.
Right.
And their definition of coaching is that coaching supports individuals, teams or groups in achieving greater self-awareness, improved self-management skills, and increased self-efficacy so that you can develop your own goals and solutions. It's a collaborative, conversation-based process which emphasizes and builds on your existing and developing strengths. It is often focused on supporting you in making changes, either to how things are at present or to your near and distant future.
Okay.
So there's a final paragraph. It's quite a lengthy explanation of what coaching is, but the final bit says, sessions may be quite structured and directional or interactive and can last up to 3 hours.
What?
Yeah. Long form coaching.
Wow.
Although, I guess I've done ones that are stretched to a couple of hours.
I've done
hour and a half.
hour and a half.
Yeah. So coaching may follow a specific model, but many coaches integrate more than one model along with elements of therapeutic approaches such as person-centered, solution-focused or CBT.
Yeah. So we would incorporate CBC.
So that's the BACP's definition of coaching. But interestingly, they see it as a therapeutic approach. So if we're looking to clarify and looking to the world of therapy to clarify what coaching is and hoping that we're not going to stray into the world of therapy.
They haven't helped.
They haven't helped us.
No. Okay. I'm glad we're unpacking this nice and succinctly.
So I think that kind of trying to put a stake in the ground and say, okay, this is where the line, this is where coaching ends and therapy begins, is a bit like standing on the shore and trying to decide where the sea starts and the shore starts. Where's that boundary between the sea and the shore?
Yeah.
And it's kind of ever shifting, isn't it? We can't really pin it down.
Yeah, and even if we think about, and I love this sort of crosses over into positive psychology. So Martin Seligman talks about positive psychology versus more traditional psychology study. As, if you think about a scale of -5 to +5 with 0 in the middle, and that traditional pathology-based psychology being 0 to -5. So people who are not okay.
Yeah.
And positive psychology looking at people who are at 0 to +5 and how they can get better. So they're okay, and how can they get better? How can they flourish? How can they bring more joy and well-being into their life? And I kind of often think of coaching as being in a similar place to positive psychology, in that we're working with well people to help them move forward. But still at the point of 0 is that grey space. And I think that that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think for some people, there isn't a grey space and they might not ever want to talk to someone about their emotions or uncomfortable thoughts. They just want to follow a process. So I had an engineer on one of my courses one time, and she really struggled to talk to anyone about anything emotional and didn't want to. She didn't want to learn how to do it. She just, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm talking about their job in the workplace. That's going to be my focus, and I'm not going to stray. And that's fine. She's staying in her lane.
Yep.
The problem comes, and I think this is a big problem for coaches who don't think that emotions and psychology belong in the coaching room, is what happens when the plan that you have for someone to achieve their desired outcome falls apart and they don't do what they say they want to do.
Not even if it falls apart, if it just stalls. You just get to a point where you're like, I can't progress.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I meant, really. I don't necessarily mean it falling apart completely, but if they're not making progress, there's a very good chance that there's some psychological or emotional barriers getting in the way.
Yes.
Now, they could be really deep-rooted childhood trauma stuff that we aren't going to go anywhere near. But how do we know unless we're prepared to explore thinking and emotions?
Yeah.
And like I say, we're not therapists, so we're not going to try and fix past trauma. But having an awareness of it, having an awareness of why someone might be struggling to move forward in the way that they say what they want to, that's part of our job, is to help them understand. And if they say, well, I can't move forward because this happened 20 years ago, well, maybe you need some therapy to address what happened 20 years ago. And maybe we need to park the coaching until you've had your therapy.
Yeah.
And then you feel ready and able to move forward. So I'm not saying that therapy belongs in the coaching room, and there's very much a place for us to refer people on to a therapist. And I think having the confidence to do that is something we all need as coaches. And I certainly have no qualms about that. I'm quite happy to do that. But we're going to have to explore emotions and psychology in the coaching room.
Yeah. And, even thinking, and we've talked about this in the cognitive behavioural approach episode, when we talked about the space model more recently, we're thinking about our thinking. We've got time to generate new thinking and explore things like limiting beliefs and that kind of thing. Everybody thinks. All humans are thinking and making meaning of the world and having feelings, having emotions. So some of that has to come into the coaching space because it's with us all the time. It doesn't mean we need therapy.
Well, the very act of coaching is psychology, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's psychology in everything.
Yeah.
So us having a conversation about what's important to us, there's an interplay there that there's some psychology involved. So I think we have to not worry about exploring emotions with people and exploring their thinking and what lies behind their thinking. I think we just have to recognize our level of confidence and competence to address those emotions and thinking, and whether it's beyond our scope. And to be able to signpost them elsewhere.
Or open up that conversation to say, what other support do you have?
Yeah.
This is straying into territory that's beyond my training.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that comes up is what happens if I ask a question about someone's emotions and they become upset, distressed, because we've started to explore emotions. And it's being able to handle that situation and make sure that they get the help they need, and recognizing that we can't do it all. Now, some people in the coaching room might see that as a failure and go, "Oh, I've gone to that place and now I've upset them and now they need other support." Well, they needed other support anyway. We've just brought it to their awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're
not causing the problem.
No, I'm not, and I'm not suggesting that we go poking for it, looking for the problem, and go, "Oh, well, this must be something more deep rooted." I attended a Gestalt weekend, which was aimed at anyone, coaches, all sorts of people, but was very much a therapy weekend. And the lady who was Gestalt therapist was kind of prodding and poking to get someone to go back. So, how did you have siblings when you were growing up? And, where did you come in the birth order and all that? And I thought, well, hang on a minute. He's not going there. Why are you poking? And I think that's recognizing the coaching room. We don't have to do that. Okay, what happened to you as a child? Because clearly something did. That's not where we go. But I think exploring what's going on for someone now in terms of their thinking and their emotions is useful.
And also, we've talked about this before, just because emotions come up does not immediately mean therapy is required.
No.
Because everyone experiences emotions. The last few months have been difficult for me, and I can't get through an episode of Strictly without crying.
No.
So that doesn't necessarily mean I need to speak to someone in a therapeutic sense. There's just emotions near the surface about certain things, and that can be the same for everyone.
Yeah, and emotions. I'm not pleased when people have an emotional response, but it shows that something is important to them if there is some emotion in the coaching room, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think if we shy away from it, then we're not helping.
Yeah.
So we're not going to go digging. But so let's imagine that someone has said they want to make some sort of lifestyle change, so maybe do more exercise, and they have a plan and they go away and they come back a few weeks later and they've not done any exercise. They might have excuses, but clearly something's not sitting right for them, and that is worth exploring. And if that does go to a place of, well, I can't do this because something happened 20 years ago and that's getting in the way, it's good to know. Because otherwise we're just wasting our time. They're going to keep coming back going, yeah, I haven't done that. So there's definitely some power in that if we were able to help them in the coaching room and help them move forward, that's great. And we've got that, we're connecting with their emotions in a way that might help them move forward. if not, then maybe a therapist is going to help them resolve those issues, and they can come back to us and we can help them move forward.
Yeah. And sometimes we're the first person they've reached out to. I think that coaching is an accessible and non-stigmatized form of support that people can reach out for, and maybe they might know that they need some extra help, but counselling is a step too far for them for some reason. Yeah. So if we uncover that there's more, whether that's in the discovery call initially or during coaching, I just think that's a really good outcome.
Yeah, and I think the idea that we can't address emotions and psychology in the coaching room, I think that ship has sailed. I think
everyone's emotional.
Yeah, I think it might, because coaching really started off as a management intervention to help someone reach their goal in the workplace environment. But, with the whole introduction from positive psychology of the whole well-being movement, that's opened up conversations about someone's mental health. And again, we're not mental health experts, but we have that recognition that people do struggle with their mental health and maybe they need more support. And unless we're addressing that in the coaching room, I think all coaching should be about someone's well-being.
Yes.
I don't think that's something we should isolate. Go, well, that's not for us. We should be paying attention to that in the coaching room. And if it's in an organizational context and people are being put under pressure to achieve goals, and their mental health is struggling with that, then we need to address that. And I say it might not be for us to unpick it all, and we're not mental health experts, but a referral to a mental health expert might be in order to help them. So I think if we're looking after our clients, then we are going to be talking about psychology and emotions. That's just part and parcel of that. And on our course, we are training people to introduce psychological models that are going to help them with their thinking and help them with their emotional responses, some emotional intelligence. And I don't think we have to be shy about that. I think that is a really useful. I'm not sure how you teach someone to coach without talking about psychology.
No, I don't think you can. I don't think you can separate people out into those different parts and just work with one of them.
No, and I think what we said earlier about that idea that therapy is about the past and coaching is about the future, I think we have to pay attention to the past as well. So I get people to do a river of life exercise where we kind of see the journey they've come on. And sometimes it's really interesting to see what has happened in their life. So I'm not going to go back and try to fix it, but it's good to have that awareness.
Yeah.
That's who they are. That's how they show up as an individual. And interestingly, Rangan Chatterjee, the doctor who's podcaster and author, he talks about doing timelines with his patients. Quite often what's troubling them in a physical sense now has its origins in some stress that was happening 6 months ago. So there's that, again, awareness that our thinking, our mental approach to things is going to have an impact on our physiology and our physical health. So again, not suggesting that we have to be able to address it all ourselves, and being aware of what other support is out there is really useful. But my message, I guess, is that we have to not worry too much about straying into therapy. We're not therapists. We can't do therapy. We've not been trained to do therapy. So we have to acknowledge that people come as complex individuals. They are going to have emotions that they struggle with. They're going to have some unhelpful thinking that they struggle with. And we can do good work in the coaching room to help them address those things. And if it's beyond our scope, then we can refer them to a therapist to dig a bit deeper and to do some deeper work.
I'm just wondering if we should put some perspective on this, actually, because our doctors in particular will be in a position where they see all sorts of people in all sorts of difficult situations. For us as coaches, if we think about how long we've been coaching, How often have you signposted someone for further help?
Once.
Yeah. So that's in 15 years?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at the time it was troubling that this person needed some quite urgent support.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time I did worry that the conversation we'd had produced this response that meant she was struggling. But I wasn't. I didn't go digging for it. It's just something that came up, and suddenly this lady was reflecting on a sexual assault that happened 20 years previously. So I hadn't gone looking for that, but
No.
it had come to her mind, and she'd recognised that she'd been burying it for 20 years and was not dealt with it at all, and it was still there, lurking. And she did get some counselling, some specialist counselling, and we stopped the coaching because it wasn't appropriate. I think it was a good experience for me because it showed that we have that ability to go, okay, this is beyond my remit.
Yeah.
And you need some. I want to make sure you get this support. But I think, as I say, at the time I struggled with it and thinking, well, did I do something wrong? But I took it to supervision and we talked it through. And as I say, I definitely didn't go digging for that. But I think the experience reassured me that whilst I couldn't handle the aftermath in the coaching room, that what I could do was make sure she got the support.
Yeah.
To deal with that.
And for me, twice in 8 years, where once it was a signpost to a GP, it was very clear to me that there was potential for what was coming up to be linked to menopausal symptoms. And so the person went to their GP. And then a second time when it was needed really to refer to a therapist. And so I guess what I want to get across there is it's not because doctors see terrible things almost every day, depending on their roles, they might think it's more prevalent than it actually is. And for us, our experience is that it's not as common.
And that's not to say that emotions aren't a common occurrence.
No,
So,
but the need to refer to a therapist probably, is infrequent.
Because quite often the emotion that someone is feeling and that surfaces in the coaching room is an appropriate response to what is happening in their lives.
Yes. And that's okay, isn't it?
And if we have that trusting relationship with them, then we can hold that space for them whilst they talk about that.
Yeah.
And we don't have to shut that conversation down because it's uncomfortable for us, or we think it might be uncomfortable for them.
And we know that emotions can be fleeting. We can move between emotions from one to the next, and we don't always stay with those difficult emotions.
Yeah, I think something that comes up in talking about that is contracting and what you're contracting for in talking to someone. So if you are working in an organisational context and you are contracting for someone to talk about how they're going to hit their goals for their boss, whatever's been set for them, it's important for you to think about what you're offering in that space. And if it goes into more of an emotional life coaching territory, what are you going to do about that? How do you contract around that? Is that going to be part of your contracting that if there are things outside of the workspace that are impacting on the work, do we go there? Do we address that? Or do we say, well, that's not for us? So I think it's useful to give some thought to it. But I think, again, nowadays with the whole well-being movement, it's going to be very hard to differentiate between any type of coaching in organizations that doesn't include an element of looking after someone's well-being.
Yeah.
And having those conversations that what's going on for you in terms of stress and all of those bits, your work-life balance, and being able to talk about that. And we don't have to solve it. It might be for someone else to solve, but certainly a good conversation can be had that's going to be helpful. But my go-to definition of coaching is to generate new thinking.
Yes.
And if we can generate new thinking for someone about their situation, about their emotions, about their psychology,
About the thinking.
yeah, about their thinking, and if we can get them to think about what support they need and
Yes.
be able to talk about that, then I think we're going to do good work.
That sounds like a good place to leave it.
Let's leave it there. It's an interesting conversation. I think it's one of those that coaches struggle to talk about because they're worried about getting it wrong. And, there might be some people listening to us thinking that we've got it wrong, but it's a podcast. We're saying what we think. If you got any views, let us know.
Yeah, happy to have a conversation.
But I think we both arrived at a place in our coaching where we're comfortable with being uncomfortable with what comes up.
Yeah.
And if it's beyond our scope, then we refer people on to someone else.
And make sure they get that support.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's important.
Good. Sounded like quite a serious conversation, wasn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Next time on the podcast, we will be introducing another coaching approach to explore. So we're looking forward to that. Clearly, we haven't decided which one. Otherwise, we would be telling you. But for now, do subscribe to this podcast.
Give us a 5-star rating.
Give us a rating. Share it with your colleagues or friends who might be interested in this topic of coaching. And we will see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.